and welcome to Beginnings, the show that asks, where do creative people come from? My name is Andy. I'm the host of the show and a writer and performer based in Los Angeles, California. I will keep this intro brief. I took 2 Advil PM and I am starting to fade. Why did I take those Advil PM? Because I need to sleep. And it's so hot, it is tough to sleep. Who knew insane heat and picketing in that insane heat would leave me so bereft and yet unable to doze? It's day 80 of the WGA strike. We're 2 weeks into the SAG strike. Hotel workers here in Los Angeles are striking. The Teamsters are about to. It is an exciting, I'll even say it, electric time. I think the last time that I felt any kind of hope like this was during the Civil Rights remix back in 2020. We all know what happened there. But it does feel promising in the same way that felt promising. And folks, speaking of labor action, speaking of politics, today I am talking to Matt Christman. If you don't know who Matt is, I'm going to read you his bio right now. Originally from Manitowoc, Wisconsin, I hope I pronounced that correctly, writer and podcaster Matt Christman wasn't pursuing anything specific when he started the left political podcast Chapo Trap House with 2 friends he met online. But the show struck a nerve in the general zeitgeist, does that metaphor work? And turned into a career for Matt. The show has been going strong for 7 years now, and through Chapo and their producer Chris Wade, Matt has created a number of fantastic miniseries. Hell of Presidents, which looks at the ways America has changed by looking at who has been in power, and most recently Hell on Earth, which tells the story of the 30 Years' War both as a history lesson and as an analogy for our own era. I thought it was great and also chilling sometimes when I'm like, okay. Climate change, plague, oh, and what happened? Everything fell apart? Okay, okay. I guess I get the analogy, and it's scary. But yeah, I'm a big fan of Chapo. Starting with the Trump years, I have slingshotted daily, maybe hourly, between being galvanized to fight and being hopeless. And Chapo has given me a lot of much needed relief in those moments of despair as they make fun of the extremely risible political class and their coterie of dipshits. And Matt himself is very well read and very good at synthesizing historical events. And in particular, a lot of what he does is elucidating how the events of the last few hundred years have led us here to this moment. And through those discussions on, whether it's on his Twitch stream or in the mini-series I mentioned above, it's given me a lot of hope. It's given me some hope that things can be better. The only, I guess, disappointing thing about this episode is that the internet was the most horrendous that it's ever been while we were taping. And, look, we each... Folks, if it was unlistenable, I wouldn't have put it out. We each locally taped our sides. It mostly sounds good, so don't worry about that. But there were these large 20-second pauses in between us. And again, I took those out. Don't worry, they're edited out. It sounds like we were right there, just vibing. But, with those 20-second delays and the terrible nature of the internet connection, it was really tough to build up the conversation or have a lot of rapport, but I still think we got to a lot of interesting things. Both, Matt was very kind to walk me through the 1970s neoliberal shift that I've been obsessed with on the show for years now, and as well as, talking about his childhood. Interesting stuff. So I hope you enjoy it. And if you do, and this is your first time listening to the show, I've been doing it for 13 years. Why not check out other episodes of Beginnings? What I like to do here in the beginning is a little recommended if you like for new listeners. If you like my talk with Matt, maybe you'll like my talk with other people in and around politics. Chris Hedges, wonderful talk. David Sirota, that was great. Or, you know what? I've done a lot of, again, 13 years, a lot of amazing interviews with musicians and writers and performers and comedians. So check out those episodes. Just recently, I talked to Jeff Lemire, Wonderful Comics creator, Carl Newman from The New Pornographers, Bobcat Goldthwait, Satomi Matsuzaki of Deerhoof, tons of other people. Check those episodes out wherever you get your podcast from. Why not subscribe while you're there? Why not write a review? I really spent, I would say, 12 some odd years not really asking people for reviews. So why not write one? If you got 30 seconds and your phone's right there and you're bored. What else? You can find me on social media at Andy Beckerman. Twitter right now is a fucking mess, but I'm there. I guess I'm on Blue Sky, although I just post nonsense once every couple days. So, it's fun. It's like where all the joke writers and weird Twitter people have seemed to migrated to. What else? I've got a Substack where I talk about a lot of the political topics I mentioned prior to this sentence. It's a good way of putting it. Hopefully in a funny way. Hopefully in a down-to-earth way. You can find that at theslowdystopia.substack.com. It's free. I don't think I'll ever turn it into a pay thing because I do it so infrequently and I don't want the pressure. And stay tuned. We're on the road to 600 episodes, and there are a lot of awesome ones coming up. Before we get to that 601, Teenage Fan Club. That was fantastic. I just talked to them. Jad Fair. This morning, I talked to the Bush Tetras, who were a pioneering no-wave band in New York in the late 70s, early 80s, featuring Pat Place from The Contortions. So stay tuned for those. But for now, let's talk to Matt. I kind of want to pick your brain a little bit. I'm curious, it's funny. I went and looked up information about you online, and there was not much in a Wikipedia article, but there was this website that's a very conservative leaning website that I guess keeps track of anyone who's liberal to left. And it had an expansive entry about you, which I found.
Oh boy.
No, it was fairly comprehensive and non-ideological. I mean, I'm sure they're keeping track of the information for not great reasons, but so I want to get into some of your background, and I just brought that up because I found that interesting, and that was that's where most of the information, most of your biographical information lies.
I think I know the website you're talking about. I do remember seeing that once and being like, "Damn, they got it all together here." Weird.
But I kind of want to pick your brain because I used to be a philosophy professor before I moved into comedy and TV writing. And one of the things I've been dilettantishly still working on as I've gone into this other career is kind of, especially on the show, just as a parenthetical, because I talk about why we do the things we do. And I go global down to local a lot of the times. And we were all brought up in this kind of, I really like the way that you phrase it a lot of the times, strip the copper wires out of the walls, capitalism. And there was a big shift in the 70s, and I've been trying to kind of work through the ideological shift. And I'm curious, the way I think about it is there's this, what I call a Jakarta epistemology. So basically, some of the shift is just they murdered the right murdered a bunch of people on the left and kind of tipped the scales a little bit.
That definitely helped.
But I'm kind of curious if and some of the stuff that you talk about on your Twitch stream has helped me. But can you maybe just talk through with me just what happened in the 70s that just changed the ideology? Not just it wasn't just murdering the left a lot. But what are all these structural changes that let kind of this Ayn Randian world that we all grew up in loose?
Well, it starts, as you said, structurally, not ideologically. That comes afterwards. The big change is that our post-war institutions and our ideology of the participatory mass democracy that we created during and after World War II was predicated on a certain distribution of resources that was historically contingent and was due to the fact that the United States in that golden 2 decades or so after World War II was the main producer and consumer in the global economy, and that the United States, from its central position, set about winning this Cold War, which is really just an extension of World War II, the next phase of like a global conflict over what the world economy would look like now that you have the possibility of having, for the first time, a genuinely global economy. And that had within it these contradictions. Like the United States has these specific firms and specific economic activity and specific interests that are localized in the United States, but then it also has this role globally as the reserve currency holder, as the main military guarantor of capitalism, and that it's in order to fight that global contest with not just communism, not just the Soviet Union or China, but just the but against the self-determination of every country that was transitioning from a colonial position to a post-colonial position after the war. And the United States was very interested in making sure that those countries dealt with the United States on an unequal and in the global economy from an unequal position, so that their raw materials would be cheaper, so that it would be consumption could be higher in countries like the United States and Europe, which would facilitate social peace there at the center. But to do that meant propping up the economies in the United States' former rivals in Europe and in Japan, and building up these industrial economies there. And eventually you get to a situation where they're able to compete with America. They're able to compete with American industry. American industry loses its ability to command profits essentially at will. And then you have, as part of this process, the big oil shocks of the early 70s, which just take away one of the key unspoken generators of that post-war economic order, which was cheap energy inputs. And with that reality happening, that Keynesian consensus that had bound everyone together into a broad understanding of how the economy worked, how employment worked, how consumption was going to work, all of those were challenged, and a reckoning of some kind was forced upon every country in the developed world. And when the time for that political transformation occurred, the working class and its political institutions that were supposedly to represent working class interests had been functionally hollowed out, and their relationship to their grassroots had been broken, and their ability to fight for anything outside of the greater interests of national capitalism was eroded. So when that economic transformation occurs in the 70s to make sense of this new world, it means that the continued prosperity of the American capitalist economy would come at the expense of the upward mobility of the working class that had been the mark of the post-war Keynesian era. So that assumption that undergirded the entire American political economy and the American political project, that generational upward mobility from working class to what we call the middle class would be broken. And all of the ideological gear shifts that occur in the 70s are a result of that fundamental shift. The non-political, really, bureaucratic and technocratic transformation of America's economy creating new a new economic order, new economic relations, and new political understandings, and that we're now going to be at fundamental odds with how we thought of ourselves as a people, and that's how we thought the political and the economy and the politics were supposed to work, but which were now unchallengeable because the political framework for meaningful challenge, meaningful contest for resources had completely broken down.
Yeah. What is it about this new structure? And maybe this is just my own point of view, but it seems like it's easier for kind of like psychopathic thinking or sociopathic thinking or whatever. It's easier. Okay, maybe this dichotomy is wrong, or maybe the split is wrong. So you can tell me if I don't have it right. But it seems like, and this I'm just basing this on like Adam Curtis and like the Mayfair set, right? But basically, I don't know if you've seen those documentaries, the series, but like he's talking about how finance in Britain changes through the 50s and 60s into this period. And before, all these like companies had been family owned. And then this kind of like nouveau riche group comes in and owns all these companies. And it seems like the previous family-owned businesses at least wanted to maintain some kind of exploit their workers, but they still wanted the businesses to exist. Whereas, through this transformation into the 70s, it seems like the new investors just wanted to make money at any cost, which leads, I think, probably to private equity owning so much these days and just hollowing out businesses and letting them die and then going on to the next one. And I'm wondering, A, do I have that right at all? And then B, what is it about these new structures that make it easier for that to happen?
Well, I mean, in terms of the cultural shift from those family firms that are happy to have X amount of profits and not maximize profits, have a self-restraint, shifting boils down to the fact that they could sort of afford to do that. They could afford to leave money on the table because of the managed nature of economic activity during that period. Once you get real globalized capitalism in the 70s and a more realistically, I guess I should say, priced energy in the 70s, that really does start the creation of a totalized capitalist system. And once you get to a totalized capitalist system, I not everyone agrees with this, but I think it's true. You get to the thing in Marx that for a century people pointed to as one of the things he was wrong about, which is the tendency of the rate of profit to fall. And I think that the post-war idol, which a lot of people thought disproved that and ratified Keynes as sort of the way to deal with advanced economies, was a mirage created by the fact that the defeated Europe had been blown up and destroyed by World War II, and a lot of the former imperial countries that had not yet been knitted back into the global economic system, and that once that those linkages have been fully put together, and you have this core periphery dynamic fully established, then you have a fully totalized capitalism, and under capitalism, profits will decline secularly. And we've been living in the reality of that tendency. It's not, direct line, but a tendency ever since. And that changes the priorities of capitalists, and it prioritizes above anything else profit, and then it builds culture around that, and so that the people who are now doing business are going to be much more likely to be attracted to the Milton Friedman concept that the only value that is a real value is profit, and then to facilitate that, there are changes to regulations and the nature of the state that make it so that profit can be more easily prioritized, because there are fewer regulatory hurdles for it.
Right. I forget who the author is, but I remember there was a book that was kind of detailing all these like micro changes, like stock buybacks become a thing in like the early 80s or something like that. And all these like,
right. They weren't legal before that.
Right. And all these like little micro changes. So it's really more of like a Darwinian kind of like natural selection. Like once capitalism totalizes, you get this Darwinian natural selection for psychos.
Yeah. It's that who can pile it up the most. Well, there's still stuff to pile.
Yeah.
And the stock buybacks are crucial to that, because that means that destroys the logic of doing anything else with the money. Even capital reinvestment into the companies themselves gets put on the very far to the back of any priorities for companies, because they can do buybacks, which they do.
Yeah. So, I mean, all of this is kind of preface. I mean, I'm just trying to also, for my own edification, because at the end of the day, I guess it doesn't matter. Like, I'm like, I was in therapy earlier, and I'm just like, well, I don't know. What's going to happen? Nuclear war, climate change? What's going to get us? And is it going to happen? How soon is it going to happen? And I was just listening to a podcast the other day where they were talking about the de-dollarization, and I'm like, oh, so this is what's going to push us into war? Anyway, that's my own.
We'll see. I still think my money would just be, and everyone's money is, on nothing really dramatically changing. And the reason that I think that is because, as much as we like to imagine that we're being brutally realistic and black-pilled when we're looking at potential disruptive catastrophes, that's actually fundamentally wishful thinking, because you're imagining that there is a rupture, and rupture suggests some horizon of difference, some change, some different type of world that, yes, scary, but also a potentially new human arrangement that could bring with it something that has been completely removed from life under the current era, meaning. And the return of meaning is, we have a society that is fully dedicated to value and as such has been drained of subjective meaning.
Sure.
And rupture, catastrophe, apocalypse, horrible, but also potentially they promise the return of meaning in some form or another. And that means that you can never divorce wishful thinking and desire from the supposedly clear-eyed analysis of like catastrophizing.
Yeah. I mean, look, mine is pure anxiety creation. Mine is, I mean, I'm not even looking for, like, I think I have enough meaning in my life and the way that I've created my life. It's more of like, how am I going to, how am I going to live in a world where, this is the thing. And this is why I one of the reasons I want to talk to you, besides being a fan of both Chapo and of your own Hell on Earth and Hell of Presidents. We grew up in this world that in some way what the ruling elite created these myths about themselves that I'm only unraveling in adulthood, but in some way that I've based my life path on. And I once I started to, I guess I've been a socialist for about 20 years. Once I started to like figure that stuff out, I started to divorce myself from wanting the things I was like, having the desires I was told I was supposed to have. And I moved on to a path where I did create meaning in my life. But I'm kind of curious for you specifically, how did you figure out that the desires you've been told to have were not maybe the best desires for you personally? Does that make sense as a question?
I think a lot of it just boils down to I was a nerd. I mean, I was just a child who did not really hit it off, to put it mildly, with my fellow children. And so I got that oppositional sort of resentment of the people around me. And it wasn't that was good or healthy or gave me even good politics, but it did give me a reflexive context as I got older for processing media, politics, all that stuff that left me instinctively hostile and questioning to received ideas, but only within a very narrow framework for the most part, because there's so little actual political variety that can even be expressed publicly in the United States.
On this show specifically, being othered in some way is usually the kind of like the first kind of crack, or the first kind of like little splinter that gets in there that starts pushing you away from having the kind of desires you were quote unquote supposed to. If you didn't have that, like I was Jewish in a very Christian area, and I always say that was the first little crack, or the thing that just pushed me aside just slightly. And it didn't necessitate that I would end up the way I ended up. Like, there's no necessity there, but it pushed me. I studied nonlinear dynamics, and always like initial conditions are very important with nonlinear dynamics. And that if you start just slightly, a centimeter to the left of where, if you're like, I mean, the canonical example is putting one ski, just letting it go down a hill and tracing the trajectory of it. And if you just start slightly over, it's a completely different trajectory than the one that was going down in a certain path. So do you think just being like, what made you quote unquote nerdy? Were you just interested in certain things? Did your parents introduce you to certain things? Like, what made you, and what was your nerdiness? Because I was certainly I was into Weird Al, so I understand.
I just, my parents certainly did not put me onto anything. They were relatively apolitical and not, they didn't really read or anything. Didn't really talk about current events, anything like that. I just, I read a lot. I had a hard time relating to my fellow kids. And I don't think there's any specific element that alienated me. There's no moment or anything. It's just a general inability, I guess, to feel at home.
Yeah.
to feel comfortable with the general expectations. Although honestly, when it comes to wanting what I was supposed to want, I mean, I don't really know if I ever made some sort of heroic renunciation of worldly desires so much as I just never felt competent to even achieve them if I'd wanted to.
Was there a point where you to me, the idea of these, again, when I think about these desires I'm talking about, and this is just a new thing that the way I've been phrasing it, because really I've just been the way I've been talking about it is just talking about you're handed a script. This is the metaphor I've used for a decade now. You're handed a script, and my parents happened to read the script, and it wasn't bad for them, and they're not bad people, and they felt fine reading the script. And the things they wanted to have kids, and that was the big thing. And everything is, they're yellow dog Democrats. Everything's fine. There was something in me when I was younger that just felt the suburbs felt off for some reason.
Yeah, it certainly. Things felt off. That's for sure.
I couldn't articulate it then, what felt off about it, but just something the idea of the things that we wanted everything felt alienating without me understanding that that's what was, that's how it felt.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that it just felt like whatever was going on, it was not for me. I didn't know what was for me, but whatever was going on, whatever people were trying to want to do was not for me. But I didn't really have any idea of what something for me would look like.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're younger than me, but when I was growing up, the things you wanted were supposed to want were the things in beer commercials, right? You wanted to be on the beach and drinking beer with twins and things like that. And that was supposedly what I was supposed to want. Yet,
I mean, I think maybe I would have wanted that. I just never felt it was not just I didn't want it, but that I was not capable of it. It wasn't even, it was outside of the possibilities for me, as opposed to something that I was rejecting. Although over time, you turn it into a more concerted rejection and a expression of your denial of what they want you or whatever. But for me, I think it started off just I don't know, like being outside looking in.
Yeah. Was there something you wanted for your life at that point, or was it just...
I never had any. I never knew. I never really have had any idea of what I wanted. I never really had a ambition or a vision for myself in the future at any point in my life. Things just kind of have happened to me.
But even though, I found, the way you talk about things to be extremely helpful, and even knowing that, like, okay, you have like a following and you have a number of people who find your work to be helpful. Like, has that created some kind of ambition to continue this stuff, or is it just like, oh, well, I like doing this, so I'm going to keep doing it?
I mean, I definitely have more. I have some vague ambitions now, and I have like finding out, oh, people want to hear from me. Okay, well, what does that mean? What is the responsibilities? What should I want to talk about? What does that look like in the future? So I have now, for the first time really in my life, something like a vision. But even there, it's still pretty ad hoc, and it's still a lot of improvisation. I've never been able to put together any kind of real plan for anything.
I mean, you said you grew up in a kind of apolitical home, but was it a close home? Like, could you talk to your parents, or was it kind of just like kids did their thing and maybe you had dinner together and that was that?
I mean, I was the first child of two from my dad's second family. He had a bunch of kids with his wife. She died, and then in his 50s, he got remarried to a much younger woman, and she wanted to have kids. And I don't think he really had any desire to have any more kids. He'd gone through that already. And so we were this sort of second batch of kids for him. And they fought. I only really have memories of them kind of fighting. And then my parents broke up when I was, I think, about 7 or 8, I think. I don't really remember the specific date. And my mom then was gone. She left the state for a couple of years. And it was us and me and my sister and my dad, and he, we didn't really, he was sort of a removed figure for me. I never really felt, because of the remove, I ended up turning him into this figure of disapproval and judgment, when in fact he really didn't ever do that. He was pretty, I wouldn't want to say checked out, but he was not terribly hands-on. But in that absence, my burgeoning neurotic mind turned him into sort of a symbol of everything that I was failing at being as a son. And but yeah, that we didn't really talk about a lot of stuff. I knew my dad was a Republican, and he was, as I said, he was pretty old when I was born. So he was a World War II veteran. And he voted against Roosevelt the whole time.
Oh.
But he didn't really talk about it that much at home. He listened to Rush Limbaugh sometimes, but he didn't talk about it that much in the home. And my mom, never really had much in the way of politics. I have one memory of being tucked into bed when I was a little kid, and my mom asked me to, we were doing our prayers, and she said, "God bless Ollie North." And I was I was very small, but I still had watched enough news to be like, isn't he a bad guy? Didn't he do crimes? That was about it. So it was a lot of unstructured time by myself.
What did you get up to in that time? You said you read a lot, but what were the things that were interesting you?
I liked the Civil War. I read, and I also drew. I would draw up battle scenes of the Civil War in comic books. Drew a lot of guns. A lot of sort of a burgeoning school shooter vibe in a lot of ways. Watch TV. That was it.
What was it about the Civil War that caught your interest?
It was just this. It was stunning to know that this hugely titanic conflict had occurred in my country, and it had what I thought at the time of as these really dramatic and Manichean stakes, like the good guy, what looked to me like the good guys, the Union, and the bad guys, the South, a battle over slavery. This thing that felt as a small child to me to be a fundamental violation of anything you might call good, and that there was this huge bloody project to end it. And the drama of that really spoke to me. So I got really into the Civil War really first before I got into politics or anything.
I'm just trying to figure out like what eventually launches you into becoming someone who is not just a political person, but someone who thinks deeply about these things. Is it just that original seed of like, I thought the Civil War was interesting?
I mean, I think as I got older, politics came more to the fore because, as you come closer to adulthood, you start feeling that will to power, that desire to affect your surroundings and express some kind of a feeling of control. And politics is if you are otherwise thwarted, politics makes a good way to vent and shape those feelings. But it is always going to be the domain of losers, because if you have anywhere in your life to actually have a project and to pursue something with a real ambition and drive, then you don't need to bother with who's going to be your town councilor or whatever. You have more important, more direct in your life things to concern yourself with. Politics is a consolation prize for the otherwise thwarted and powerless, which certainly described me.
That's so sorry you were saying that. I was just like imagining like me and all the like DSA members around me. I'm just like, this checks out. We are. And I also think I'm like, well, the busier I am, the less time I have to do things. Like the more I have to spend writing a script or doing something like that, the less time I actually do have to go to DSA meetings or like agitate or whatever. Like, I mean, one of the things I was the chair of the Immigration Justice Committee, and I was like, it's a shanda that there is a migrant concentration camp 90 minutes from Los Angeles, and that if I really believe the morals that I say I have, that we should do something about it. But we never had capacity to really do much. And that it's a Geo Group. It's $1 billion company that owns it. The avenues, the holes in the armor are so small and so few that we never figured out any way to actually affect any change there. But also I was busy, which is true. But I'm kind of curious about like, at what point does does the loserness, allow you to become more political? But like, what point do you actually like start to have some kind of political consciousness?
I mean, in high school, I felt like libertarianish, and I think that's that's always going to be the first. It's large in America context anyway. It's liable to be your first real expression of political consciousness because you have absorbed American individualism as a sacrament, and anything that violates that sense of individuality becomes perceived as a crime, and so your politics are based around how to preserve that individual liberty, and that's a thing that you either grow out of or you just maintain for your whole life. And I do kind of think that is the mark of sort of an arrested political development when you throughout life maintain that fixation on individual liberty, as though the individual is a fixed category or a meaningful one in any way, and it's not a contingent concept, whatever. But even then, the libertarianism was mostly, we shouldn't stop people from doing drugs if they want to. I never accepted the premise of the minimalist state because I did have a sense that there needed to be something to be done for people who could not succeed in their own in capitalism. And then the fact that when I was in high school, I had a very freak spinal cord injury that left me permanently disabled and for a wheelchair in a time, and then on crutches and with a limp after that, made me aware, if we were in a real libertarian, quote unquote, paradise, I would be turned into dog food. And since I don't want to be turned into dog food, then it's probably a bad idea to promote a politics that would turn people into dog food. And so that means, like, by the time I got to college, it just became more broadly left libertarian and, of course, like an anarchist phase. But for a long time, and then just, watching the news and getting mad was a way to feel like I'm part of some team that's got stakes somewhere.
Right. Can you walk me through the actual, like, change in your thinking? So you have this injury. Like, when you say freak injury, like, you mean like it was just like a quirk of biology, or like, did you fall, or like what exactly happened?
I still to this day don't really know, because I had back pain. It was my senior year of high school. I had back pain, and my mom sent me to a chiropractor, which swing and a miss there. And I had like a heat pad, and then one day I just woke up and my legs just didn't work at all. Just could not move them. And I ended up going to the hospital, and they didn't really know what was going on. The first doctor I saw in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, was some squarehead who said, "Oh, it might be bubbles in your spinal fluid. It might, even out. We'll wait a couple days." And then they decided to go to a specialist in Milwaukee, and they were like, "No, we got to go in there immediately." And so it turns out that I had a lesion on my spinal cord. And the reason that was so baffling is because that's really not something that happens unless you have a significantly compromised immune system, which I didn't have, or some sort of infection elsewhere, which I also didn't have. So it just, to this day, I don't think anyone's ever just explained to me anyway where it came from. But they were able to, 9 hours of surgery, they got it out, but the damage had been done. And so I had to do a lot of physical therapy, and I did get better. I went from a wheelchair to a cane, and eventually was able to walk unassisted. But I still have what's known as Brown-Séquard syndrome, which is where because the way that fibers are wrapped around the spine, when you have damage across them, it distributes the damage differently, so that one of my legs has as much strength as it would have had if I had not had that injury, but it's pretty much numb. It's tingling. It feels like it's asleep all times. And the other leg it's still a little numb, but it's got much more sensation, but it's also much weaker, and I kind of have to drag it when I walk. And yeah, that was right when I was that happened to me right as I was leaving high school.
So then, like, when do you start to think, like, hey, if I play out the politics in my head, like, I'm dog food? Like, when do you start to, like, actually, like, think through these things?
I don't really know how much I did. I didn't really, I didn't really spend a lot of time thinking about, creating meaningful, coherent politics. I was mostly just reacting to what I was seeing in the news, and picking guys I liked and guys I didn't like, and vague ideas about what could be good. It didn't feel necessary to have anything more dramatic than that, because I had other worries. And, I was recovering from this injury, and then I was going to college, where I was again failing to hit it off with other human beings. And, I was not really doing much that way. It was really only the realities of the context of 9/11 and the war in Iraq that forced me to have a opinion, have a reaction to what was happening, and I just knew what I did not like. But anything more involved in that, it took a longer time to come together.
Yeah, I think there was this like series of events that happened that kind of like. At least this is what happened to me, and I think maybe this happened to other people, but like seeing the election stolen right in front of our faces, then 9/11, then attacking Afghanistan, even though I went back, I thought I was like, oh, maybe I was misremembering this, but I remember being like, seeing like a article that was like, oh, the Taliban will hand over bin Laden, just show, all Bush has to do is show proof that he was involved in the attack. And then instead we just attacked Afghanistan, and then giant war marches against Iraq, and then Iraq. And this thing that, like, these events in succession kind of just like knocked me out of like whatever stupor I had been from from the 90s, where like everything was mostly placid except for a handful of domestic terrorism.
Yeah, that was it.
So okay, so it was like kind of just like the shock of the early 2000s that kind of like in addition to your injury that kind of like started to knock you out of your beliefs.
I mean, like I said, nothing was very formed because it didn't feel like it needed to be. It's just vague opinions. Like I have vague opinions about TV shows or something.
No, I know. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is like, when do you start to consciously have beliefs about these things, or like some kind of like ethical beliefs or something like that that change how you act?
I mean, I don't think anything changed how I acted. That's the thing. I was still living my life. It's just a question of like what my opinions on what was happening were.
But you're different. I mean, you're different now than you were then, right?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I have this now. You know, I'm a guy on the internet now. You know, so I have like thinking about this stuff is now just not just consumption. It's also production. It's avocation and vocation.
Right. I guess the thing I'm thinking about is, on the show, what I try to think about, like, my guests, like, at what point, like, you could have, this is the counterfactual, you could have just been this libertarian guy, or like even a left libertarian guy, whatever, that never made anything. And I'm wondering, like, what was the difference between you becoming that person and you becoming the person you are?
I mean, I guess I don't know. I don't know.
Because I just want you to know that, like, I find some kind of real comfort in the way that you talk about stuff. Because it's not just that you have this breadth of knowledge that I find really useful for my own kind of like philosophical stuff, but like you guys are funny about it too. And in a world that I find to be very disturbing, there's not a lot of chances for me to be able to laugh at these things that I find so disturbing.
I guess it was probably Bernie in 2016, just because, I mean, I was left of Obama during the Obama years, but I, of course, had been very enthusiastic for Obama in 2008. I felt like, even though I heard, all of the very well-reasoned arguments for why he was going to be a sellout and he was going to suck, I at that point I had a blog. That's what people had before social media, and nobody read it, of course. But I put it out there. I felt like I needed to write, just put out my feels about what was going on during the frickin' Shrub presidency. And I remember I wrote a thing about like, look, okay, he's probably going to be bad, but we need to be disillusioned. We can't just go in pre-disillusioned. We have to have the process. We have to go through the process of being disillusioned. So just chill out and let us have this for a second, so that we can fall, so that we can, have the emotional sense of betrayal. And then sure enough, that's what happened. And then by the end of the O'Bungler years, there was this deep, sour sense that there was no political horizon to speak of, and that there was really no reason to pay attention to politics at all. And then, the Sanders campaign starts, and there's this articulation of a critique that had not been given that kind of platform before, and all of a sudden it feels like, oh, there's a possibility. There's something else. There's another option out there, and everything flows from that. Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense to me, because I think that was also my trajectory. I did identify as a socialist around, like, 9/11 kind of really politicized me. In a way, I started reading Counterpunch and a bunch of other kinds of things, and Chomsky and so on and so forth. But I didn't act on any of it. I was like, this is what I believe, and if someone asks me something, I can explain why I believe it. But it wasn't until 2016 where I actually started to act on my beliefs, or where it felt like there was actually some kind of hope of some kind of pathway where there was a path to power. I mean, we know what happened, but
yeah. I think that's that's a bunch of people, and that's why the show became popular, is because it was this unserved market. There was no, even in quote-unquote alternative media, there was no consistent expression of that point of view. So people were really hungry for it.
You know, when you said you didn't have a lot of, well, I don't know. You said loser, but did you have friends in high school or college? Like, were there people like you could talk to, or were you really just like isolated and on your own?
I had some friends. It's just, they weren't much cooler than I was. And, I still, even with those, had to spend a lot of time alone. And in college, it took me like a while. It took me like a couple of years.
Do you know like what eventually got you out of your shell in college?
I just, you have a chance encounter in a class with somebody who you hit it off with, and then you're able to move from there. But for a long time, I was just not able to make those connections.
Did you have a major?
Yeah, I was history. I was double major history and English writing.
Okay,
but I had no idea what I was going to do with it. I had no real ambitions to be anything. I was just improvising. Like, okay, my mom wants me really to go to college. She was like, you cannot stay here after the spinal injury. You've got to go to school. So, all right, some neighbor of ours had a school I could go to. I went there, and I majored in the classes I liked taking, but there was no. I never really. I just kind of let everything happen to me, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I never really dealt with what had happened to me. And as a result, I ended up kind of being stagnant for a long time.
When your mom left, did you have any contact with her, or was she just gone for those couple years? Yeah,
she was gone. She came back though, and then I had joint custody with her and my dad. But then my dad married. I think honestly, just to have somebody to help deal with the kids. This woman who had something wrong with her in her brain. She's like, I think they call her BPD or something these days, but just really awfully combative, paranoid, mean person. And that the relationship between my parents was sort of dominated by this person who's at every point wanted to create maximum conflict.
Oh, God. Of course. I learned stuff like this, and I was like, of course you would want to kind of like maybe like curl up into yourself in some way when, like, would
like I my room was in the basement. No, in both of my houses, my mom's and my dad's house, my room was in the basement, no windows, and I would just be at my desk like drawing a gun or something, and I'd hear my stepmom and my dad arguing about something to do with custody, and I would just have this like ball in my stomach. I would just have this nausea, and that was a lot of the time. So I was pulled inward.
Yeah. Oh God. Have you ever like talked to your mom about any of this stuff, or is it just kind of like it's not talked about in your family?
I mean, so my dad died when I was 16. A year before my back exploded. And that was very sad, obviously, but I did not have to deal with my stepmother anymore. So that was nice. So, I moved in with my mom, and then my sister, who was 2 years younger than me, she had a very hard time dealing with the death of my father, and she, became the new person in my life who was causing problems and being, very volatile and yelling and stuff. And I showed my value by being the good kid who didn't cause any problems. But part of that was just not really saying anything, just reading my book and being in the basement. And so I never really got back closer to my mom after she came back. And, we had a good relationship, but and that, it was cordial. And when she told me she loved me a lot, and I saw her and would call her on the phone and stuff, but we never really had those. Maybe a couple times ever talked about any of that stuff, but I don't know. For the most part, I never really was able to bring it up.
Yeah. So, like, when do you start to establish, better relationships with people? Like, is it by, you know, through having, you know, the Chapo, or like, is it a point in college? Like when you start to, like you said, a chance encounter, but like when, you know, cause it seems like very difficult, like, you know, going through this stuff it feels to me like it would have been, I would have like probably shut myself off forever, and I would have resented people, and I would have just like, I don't know. That's how it feels in me, like how I would have, but you dealt with it in a different way. And I'm kind of curious, you know, when did you start to transcend this stuff?
You know, around, like second half of college, I started to reach out and deal with people and make friendships and stuff like that.
Was there something specific? Like, did you go to therapy? Did you read something? Like,
no. Yeah, I know. I've kind of floated around and I bump into things, and then I have a reaction to the encounter, and then I deal with that. Agency has always been the hard thing for me.
Interesting, because I think of you as someone who has a very, even if it is difficult for you, that you have a very specific viewpoint, and you figure out ways to disseminate that viewpoint.
I mean, yeah, I post, but like, and that, like when this was happening, and I was already posting, you know, like this is relatively early internet forum era before we get the social media or even blogs, and I was posting on a forum, and so I was like reaching out that way. But you know, that's because that was the lowest friction, lowest risk way to do that. Was to do it behind a keyboard where I'm not actually having to encounter other people and deal with them.
Yeah, and
deal with the possibility of rejection or awkwardness or humiliation.
Yeah. But you're still, I guess what I'm trying to figure, like, you're still doing it. Again, you could have walled yourself off. You could have said or believed what you believed and then not put it out into the world. Do you know, like, what was it? And we're right at the very end. So, you know, I'm just curious, like, was there something where you're like, you know what, I need to, even if you're just reacting to things, you still want to put it in the world. And I think there's something specific about that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is probably bound up in ego, just the desire to be heard, to be reckoned with, to not just be another person, to be a specific person, and the internet, the development of the internet, and the development of social media did create this new economy of attention, and for someone who had never really had any. It became a way to get some.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that I had, like, for me, this kind of like the libertarian. I was never interested in libertarianism, but I did have this kind of, like, I will call it malignant desire to be singular. And for, I would say, a large part of my creative life, it was about creating things that were unique as opposed to good, whatever your qualifications for good are. But I'll say for my own beliefs, like, they were unique, but they were not great. It wasn't great writing. It wasn't great performance, whatever it is. Right. But it took me a while to get over that kind of, like, malignant iconoclasm. Whereas it seemed like it was just that you're younger than me. And so, like, the advent of the internet and of Twitter and everything kind of, like, happened at the same time that you were ready. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think I think I was pretty stagnant, but it did provide outlets that, again, like, made me have to reckon with their existence. Okay, what does it mean to be in a world where you can do this now? And so that sort of made me have to think more of, okay, if I'm out here putting my opinions in the world so that people will acknowledge me, well, what are they? You know, like, what is the actual thing I'm trying to get across? Like, what is the deeper analysis, the deeper cry of the heart that is generating this need to reach out? And it was only because of the existence of that framework and that possibility that made me feel like it was worth interrogating and intensifying understanding of that.
Matt, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It was really interesting, and I really meant that, how much the stuff, either the podcast or Hell on Earth or Hell of Presidents or Chop Out, it's really meaningful. So thanks.
Well, thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, oh bye, oh bye, oh bye.